Right. So just stand for a few moments. Feet hip width apart, toes pointing forwards. And I've talked about, feeling the support from the ground, from your legs, support for the upper body from your back, support for your whole of your body through your skeleton and so on and so forth. Just to broaden that out a little bit. And using a formula that is more often in Tai Chi applied to push hands, where they sometimes talk about there being 5 stages, or I prefer to think of as 5 elements rather than stages: to listen, to yield, to neutralize, to borrow, and to return. But we can apply the same kind of idea to any kind of situation where there's any kind of pressure. And what we're doing here is we're learning to listen to our body and to our body's response to the pull of gravity. And there are various things that we can do about this. We can focus on the hips, we can soften the knees, we can adjust the weight, and so on and so forth. But really, in order to do that, you have to know what it is you're trying to adjust. So to listen, to be aware of, to sense, one way or another. It's about bringing your awareness into your body and to what's happening to your body, not just your body in an abstract way, but your body in the space that it's in, with various factors that are going on. So I'm aware of the wall behind me and so on and so forth. Then we try and find a way to yield, to bring the energy of gravity, the pull of gravity, the force, however you think of it, not forwards or backwards or over there, but straight down in to our legs. So there's a pathway, a channel for the pull of gravity to go through our body, and to allow that to happen. So rather than standing with knees and hips and back stiff, saying, well, I'm not going to let gravity pull me down, we let gravity pull us down to a certain extent. Then we neutralize. So imagine you're standing on a trampoline, and you go and stand on the trampoline, and then you just settle in, and the trampoline gives a little bit, and then it stops giving, and you can stand still on the trampoline, or a bouncy castle, or something like that, which means that the degree of pull from the pull of gravity is now matched by the degree of push up from the trampoline. And that neutralization is principally, to begin with at least, through hips, buttocks, legs, and feet. Now, as you stand there, there is still the pull of gravity. Neutralizing the pull of gravity doesn't make it go away. It just means that there's a balance. It's like getting a set of scales with an equal weight on both sides. So it's in this position that we begin to turn for this first exercise. Arms feeling quite heavy. So while you're doing this, you could argue that your shoulders are yielding to the pull of gravity. Let them hang down. And at a certain point, muscles, tendons, ligaments, and so on in your shoulders won't let the arms drop any further. And so that's the the yielding leading to the neutralization. You raise your arms. So you use obviously muscles in your arms. You have the intent to raise your arms to a point where, again, there's a neutral feeling, where the effort that you're making to raise your arms matches the effort that you're making to, that gravity is making, if you like to think of gravity making an effort to pull them down. Now, obviously, some of this is going to involve conditioning on the part of certain aspects of your anatomy. And because we're trying not to develop stiffness in our muscles, whilst we are using big muscles like the triceps and biceps, of course, we're trying not to overuse them. They're there, they're a presence, but don't just lock your arms up. Try and get a sense that there's more than that going on in your arms and your shoulders, and indeed your upper back and other places, as you maintain the position. So we start to engage more of the body. Now put one foot forwards, moving your weight. So listen, yield, neutralize. And what we're dealing with principally here at the moment is a vertical force, or two vertical forces, downward and upward. But we're also using that. We sink into the back leg and the back leg pushes us out. That was exaggerated, by the way. The leg shouldn't completely straighten. I want you to see. So I need to take the time to yield. And if you were standing on a trampoline, you'd be standing there and think, well, it's time I did some bouncing up. And the first thing you would do is you drop down a little bit more. So the material of the trampoline itself, whatever it's made of, is sort of stretched out a little bit more. There's a little bit more kind of pressure, if you like, stored in that, and then it pushes you back. So that's to borrow, because you've allowed gravity to pull you down a bit more. You've gone beyond the neutralization stage, and then there's the return. And in terms of the solo exercises, you're not really returning against gravity. In push hands, you would return the power of the push, ideally, to your partner. But in solo exercises, perhaps return is the wrong word. Expression, perhaps, is a better way of thinking of it. And we start to move. So these 5 stages, these 5 elements of push hands can be applied to solo exercises. So initially, it's quite useful to think of them as separate things, but really they're all interrelated. Have your other foot forwards. And there's 2 alternative models for this that we can use. One is, if you imagine a circle with a dot in the exact middle, the dot will be the listening. And then the other 4 would be on the circumference of the circle. Or if you imagine something like a pyramid or a building, the foundation of the structure is listening, and then after that you would have yielding. You wouldn't really have borrowing and returning in the same way. You'd have the neutralization. You build a wall strong enough so that gravity doesn't automatically pull it over. maybe you might want to get a bit stronger because you might think about other factors that would affect the wall, the wind, people sitting on the wall, or whatever. So you can start to play around with these things. I think listening has to be a constant, whether we're yielding at that time, borrowing, returning, what the exact mix is, depends on the situation, the circumstances, the environment that you're in. But without the listening, you're not in a position to actually make those adjustments or make use of those particular skills, those particular tools that enable you to continue moving. So now just sinking down and pushing up, borrowing and returning. So the top position is the neutral position, Wu Chi. We sink down a little bit more, we feel the legs working harder, and eventually, before they start to become really uncomfortable, we go up again. And again, there's going to be physical conditioning taking place. So at the moment, we're borrowing from gravity in order to move our hips. But because our hips are moving, our shoulders are moving. Because our shoulders are moving, our hands are moving. So we bring our hands around. We then have the shape. So we create a shape not just for the yielding in terms of our posture, but also for the return. We want to do something very specific with return. That too requires listening. Listening to the shape that your arms are making. Is it the correct shape for the exercise that you're doing, or do you need to adjust it? If it's the correct shape, is there this sense of energy running through, movement, flow running through your arms freely? And can we do something about that? So if it doesn't feel quite right, at least we know we're listening at that point. But we might find ourselves thinking, oh, well, no, my right shoulder's not yielding, or something like that. Or it could be a lot more subtle than that. So if we're in an in-person situation and we were doing push hands, we would then begin to apply that to that other person, to our partner, gradually, in a sense, pressure testing our ability to listen, yield, neutralize, borrow, and return in what could be regarded as a slightly less conducive environment. And then the wild goose. And again, we listen to the change in the body. It's important to note that listening isn't the same as thinking about something. Thinking is quite a slow process. So if we think about the term listening, somebody's talking to you and they say something and you start thinking about exactly what they said, you'll probably miss the rest of the sentence. There's a certain amount of patience required in listening, because it may take a while for the sentence to finish. And then parting the clouds, hands crossing, listening as your arms rise. Can you find a shape for your arm and a kind of pathway for that arm to move through that doesn't create tightening in the body, that gives you the minimum of resistance to the movement. That means being aware of what's going on in your body, listening to what's going on in your body, but also listening to the environment around you, which at the moment is of course a fairly controlled environment. But next time we've got a high wind, go outside and try this exercise. And in a gusty wind, it's a lot trickier. Now, dragon plucks the stars from the sky. So as we go through the different exercises and different patterns of movement, we're learning different responses to those basic ideas, different means of expression, of releasing, returning, if you like to think of it like that. Slightly different balance of forces acting on your body. When one hand is up in the air and the other one isn't, how do we manage to maintain that sense of equilibrium in our body and mind? And you may notice, so for instance, a very common habit, I'm not quite sure why we do this, but I see it lots, and I'm sure I do it, is we do this and we go a bit further. Oh, I can go a bit further here, but that throws our body off. Now, pushing in forward direction. Before we do this, though, let your arms drop down and just go into the turning. So most of these things start off as a very deliberate thought out. Oh, I've got to turn to the left. I've got to turn to the right. But it becomes very, very subtle. So imagine if it, I mean, to reverse it, what we've got are these vertical forces being translated into a horizontal force. But imagine if you could have something like I don't know, something like a windmill. You get a little handheld windmill, and you could then have a horizontal force. You hold it into the wind, and with a well-designed structure, that the wind, the direction of the wind will change. The direction of the force will change. Sorry, not the wind, into a vertical movement. In a way, we're doing the same thing, but the opposite way around here. And then hands, the full exercise, pushing up first of all. And as before, can we find that soft pathway? Down, turning and pushing out. And the other way. And then facing forwards and pushing out. So there's a great deal of potential in the returning, the releasing stage for various patterns, given us really the whole diversity of movements in Tai Chi and Qigong. So we don't want to move in such a way or to a point where I'm kind of tightening up, because it would be like we're holding the windmill up in the wind, and then somebody comes along and stands in front of it and blocks the wind from moving it. It will just slow down to a halt. One more round. So we learn to make good use of the energy provided, potentially provided for us by the pull of gravity. Just as a sailor might learn to make good use of the wind blowing on the boat by using the sails correctly. And then letting your hands drop down. Changing, circling path. Not only are we making maximum use of that energy, but we're also moving towards a point where that energy doesn't act against us. And then, if it's comfortable in this position, you turn a little bit. Noticing how this feels compared to the last turn, the last exercise that we did. And then changing sides. In the same way, we learn to yield to obstructions within the body. So say your shoulders a bit tight, rather than trying to push through that, we can sometimes find a way around it, or rather, the body can work out a way around it. And there's a lot of potential for that in most cases. And in the turn, if it's comfortable. And when we're able to do that, I've used an image many times, the water flowing over a rock and gradually dissolving and eroding it away. So to make that image work, if it's an attractive image for you, you have to be able to develop the qualities of listening, yielding, and indeed neutralizing. Now, rowing a boat in the middle of the lake, you sink down, you borrow, you return, you feel yourself going up. You sink down, you borrow, you push your hips back. Now, at this stage, you continue to yield, you put the emphasis on the yielding through the hips, because you borrow from gravity, and that brings your head up, and then you push up. And then once again, we bring our arms into the movement. One more time. and then adding in the horizontal turning for polishing the table hands, somewhere between hips and navel. One more time in each direction. And then coming back to the neutral position. So we can push out from that central position, but only as far as the idea of neutralizing and borrowing can take us. Always in Tai Chi, an intent not to strain, not to introduce any form of kind of resistance, apart from that is provided through the elasticity of the body and the energy. Like a trampoline, you don't try and stop the trampoline from pushing you up. I suppose you could do, but if you stood there and dropped down, and then as the trampoline pushed you up, somehow managed to sort of push back, you'd have to have something to lever yourself against. But obviously, that's not what the trampoline is for. So, we retain all the time a degree of elasticity, a degree of suppleness. If you think about the spring, if you overload a spring, it breaks. So we learn where the limits of the movement actually are. And again, we're aware of that. And the awareness is really the mind training element, the meditational element, if you like to think of it like that, of monitoring what's going on in our body the whole time. We need to apply a conscious intent to do that sometimes. Simply standing is a good way of doing that without the distraction of any kind of movement, or you can sit and do that. That's a kind of meditational techniques. So that becomes part of your kind of standard skill set. Now, a slightly wider start. We're going to do part of the wild horse's mane. Moving your weight from side to side. Moving across and turning. There's always, I like to emphasize those moments when we return to a sense of awareness of the body. I've described them in the past as punctuation marks, like a comma in a sentence. Those are the moments where we have an opportunity to return to the 5 stages that I've talked about, 5 elements that I've talked about. We listen, yield, etc. on each leg. If you practice like this, you'll develop an intuitive sense. In my experience, you develop an intuitive sense of what you should be doing. Should it be the yielding bit that you haven't quite got? Have you not quite neutralized? Are you able to go through that process of borrowing? If you haven't, have you properly yielded? And then finally, we arrive at the return. So come into your right foot. We listen, yield, neutralize, borrow from the right leg, and we return to the left leg. Part the wild horse is made. So this is an interesting exercise, and there's a very clear dynamic here from yang to yin. The yang would be the pushing outwards. Now, this is where again we can start to think of that process of neutralization, borrowing, because what we don't want is for this extended arm to be kind of straining. And that's harder to do as we move out from the body. And arguably, the difference between this and at least some of the exercises we do is that it does have this very distinct sense of reaching out. One more onto each side. We begin to get a greater awareness of the subtleties of our body's ability to return. Where do we find expansion, contractions? How do they interact with each other? How is the movement directed, shaped, formed in the first place? Okay, and shake out. So at the moment, all of these are very deliberate. If we practice them, like many things that we start off learning, learning to do anything almost, you learn, yeah, this is what I do here, then I do this, then I do that. You keep repeating those, and those actions become part of how you move. If you try to play guitar and you're learning, I've got to put my finger here, I've got to put my finger here. And somebody comes in, so have a go on your guitar, and they go, and they play a tune because they practiced it a lot, and they know that they get a certain effect with a certain formation of their fingers, and they've got the memory, the intent, and the physical training to actually position those fingers in exactly the right way. And they've got it to a point where they no longer need to have it in the front of their brain. And this is something that applies again to lots of things. So if we start to do this, we can begin to apply these 5 aspects of how do we deal with pressure? How do we deal with that long queue in the shop, or that difficult form we've got to fill in, or something like that? We can begin to apply some of these stages, if not all of the stages, to those situations. 1 foot forwards again, and transferring the weight. And again, ideally, perhaps, well, yeah, what we're aiming towards, I don't know if it's possible, but is to never lose that listening, to never lose that ability to yield, to neutralize, realizing that the structure of our body, our root, the way that we're moving, are all things that are influential on the yielding, on the neutralization, and indeed the borrowing and returning. But in my experience, we do lose that all the time. And I think in many ways, the ability that we have to put our attention out to notice, oh, there's a wall behind me, or there's a hole in the ground, or something like that, is a very useful one. And it enables us to take this art from this nice, comfortable space that we're in at the moment into our wider lives. And then raising your toes and your heel, one foot can be slightly turned out, push the back knee forward. To raise toes or to raise heel, we borrow a little bit from gravity, make sure that we maintain our structure and that we're able to raise and begin to move the foot in the correct way. Bring your foot in, contract your leg and push out, expanding the leg. Chicken. Have your other foot forwards. Check your structure. Remember, in a sense, all of these are the theoretical movements. Theoretical in the sense that we're not walking down the road carrying a shopping bag. We're not trying to cross the road. We're not dealing with that form or whatever. So we're learning tools and skills that we can begin to take out into our lives. That doesn't mean that this isn't important, by the way. There are other things about the personal practice than just developing tools and skills. There is also the sense of well-being that we can get from the stillness, the calmness of the movements. Since perhaps it suits you to think in terms of the energy flowing, and so on and so forth. And then raising your toes and your heel. And stepping in. and step through. And then go back the other way. And two. Put your right foot forwards. Put your weight into your back foot. And anybody, let's start with pigeon stretches. You push forward, you sink into the front leg, you feel that sense of a push back up. Using that, move your arms like a wave rising up through the front leg, through your belly, through your chest, pushing your elbows out, drawing your fingers apart. And so I've often described this as 4 stages. You go forwards and then you sink down and you feel the push up and so on and so forth. But actually, as you get used to that, you realize as you start to go forwards, there is more and more weight sinking into your front leg. So the wave slowly builds. More time. Same kind of idea. You settle into your back foot, you feel the push forwards, and it's the sinking down into the front leg that gives that little bit of energy for your hands to swing forwards with. That and just the momentum, the energy that comes from your arms swinging freely. So your body stops, your hips stops, your shoulders stop, but because there is no resistance in your shoulders, in theory, your arms just swing forward. So not only are you now yielding to the pull of gravity, but as that movement comes from the back foot, from the back leg, it comes up through your back. As it reaches your shoulders, you're also allowing that free passage through. It's not a one-way pathway. Change into pushing wave. So now the pathway for the return is more defined, preciser, with a stronger sense of intent. You're not just letting your arms swing through, you're turning it into a push. So how we shape the arms, given that energy that comes from the back foot, or that push, that movement that comes from the back foot, has to go through shoulders, back, upper and lower arms, and so on and so forth. It's really important that their structure and how they relate to the rest of the body is correct. One more time. Going forwards. Turn to your left. And as you do, feel how that tends to guide the arms out a little bit. You could almost do this like the middle movements for pushing in for a direction. Those of you who know the exercise. But in fact, we're going to do wind blows the windows, so there's a slight change to the shape of the arms. And in between the legs, we let the arms drop right down. So we get a certain amount of momentum from the dropping down. So long as we're not blocking that, then our arms will drop down and they'll carry on swinging because they're quite heavy. Remember, there's no resistance to the movement in our shoulders. So again, all we really need to do at this point is to make sure that we're not getting in the way. And then raising your back heel, bringing your foot in. Hips yielding to the pull of gravity. Maybe just bringing your foot up. So this is quite challenging because we often find ourselves straining to raise the leg, understandably so, because it's quite heavy, and also because of that little thing about being on one leg. So all sorts of things can start to happen that lose our ability or block our ability to yield, neutralize, borrow, and return. But if we can detect those through the listening, we can begin to do something about it. You start to do listening. Oh, I'm lifting. I'll drop my head, and so on and so forth. So that listening, that sensing, that awareness, something we aim to be constantly with us. Okay. And there are real benefits in that. There are substantiated benefits in that, as we know from the kind of work that's been done with what is now referred to as mindfulness and so on, that focusing of our attention is strongly associated with a deep sense of calmness, a stillness, and you know, in a sense, it doesn't matter if you were doing that and kind of wobbling around. Still, it's an encouragement to bring your attention into your body. You don't have to deal with that awkward form or whatever it is right now. You can just take a step back from it. So, pigeon spreads its wings with the left foot forwards. And that's where we start to get that sense of spaciousness. And it's possible to develop that sense of space even under pressure because it comes from the listening. And the more we practice listening, potentially the more space we have. Space in the mind because we're not preoccupied with other things. We have space in the body because the awareness that we develop helps us to yield to the pull of gravity and so on. And then changing. resting wave. One more time. Going forwards. Turn to your right. Let your left shoulder push your left hand forwards. Your right shoulder push your right hand back. Turn the hand palm up, palm down. Wind blows the Put in. Each time we add a detail, going from fixed step to moving step, for instance, as we've just done, we raise the possibility that we lose some of that ability to yield, because as we start to move and as we start to change, quite often various factors will cause a bit of resistance. If we're listening properly, we will recognize that. And if we can recognize that, we can begin to do something about it. We can begin to maybe raise the leg. And then step through. And then going back. Dragonfly skims the water. Putting your feet down. Good. Rubbing your hands together. Tapping over your face. Over your head and neck. Down to one shoulder and your arm. On the other side. Onto your back. Around your hips. the legs. Right on your belly and the upper part of your chest. So a great deal of emphasis given to this factor of yielding. There can be no neutralization, returning, etc., without the yielding any more than a spring will work if it doesn't first give to the force acting on it in one way or another. But it's important to realize that the yielding is part of an interrelated family, if you like. Think of another image, for instance, that the yielding, neutralizing, borrow, returning are like four sticks leaning against each other. What they stand on, what they rest on, is the listening. And so, in a way, it tests our ability to listen, and it's through listening that we get that sense of spaciousness and so on and so forth. So these things interact and feed into each other all the time. So sinking down, and then embrace tiger, return to mountain. Round. And thank you very much. And another hour that passes very quickly.